in order to give the whole floor also the chance to answer your questions and not only spend the time on formulating the questions here, let's go and get a couple of questions from the floor and then see what our panelists, but also our fellow attendants here would like to answer there. This is all about shaping the work going on more in detail later on in the afternoon. Yeah? Okay. Who wants to go first?
To formulate the question.
Yeah.
Here's one. Here's the second one. There's also one. Okay, start with there.
So our group was the 5 of us over here, and we would like to hear the panel tell a little. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Hear you, yes.
Okay. We would like the panel to tell us more about the blockages they face in building this coalition, drilling through this silo, and building this more comprehensive campaign. But we don't want just bullet point answers. We also want them to delve on the power, the dominant discourse around power, and how would they react when third-party, independent, credible organizations retrofit retrospectively evidences to also support the dominant discourse instead of joining forces for challenging the power and the blockages.
Very good. Wow.
We've got a specific example, the current SOFI report, which has paired hunger numbers, which is produced by IFAD, WFP, and FAO. We think it's tremendously concerning. And these are 3 tremendously credible organizations who've retrofitted a hunger definition.
Who on the panel wants to trying to give a short reply or answer? It can't be a real answer to this big question. At least touch on this issue. Harjit, would you be ready to take this?
I think we can do a full conference on this question. The co-option microphone, please.
Yes, this one here.
We are seeing such kind of co-option for years now. It has increased much more. If you look at the funding coming for some of these agriculture research institutions or FAO or IFAD, who is driving, who is doing the backseat driving. So we see them that these organizations are actually coming with a report. Yes, we see them as very credible organizations, but now the backseat drivers are changed. They are only the face of it. So, and backseat drivers are as the same rich country, World Bank, IMF, and corporate nexus, which want a particular kind of a discourse to continue. And they want a particular set of solutions. At ActionAid, the way we have defined, and we have been listening since morning, the biofuel solution or the soil carbon markets, the climate smart agriculture, that is being pushed as a solution. And there's a big politics behind it. Because rich countries don't want to take the responsibility, they want to package something in a manner which is more saleable. And we also in developing countries do have corrupt politicians, I won't mince my words, to accept these models so that they can have a different kind of alliance at that level. So that's the problem. And all these big organizations are no more independent. So their credibility is totally at stake, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much for this attempt to give a short answer to a very big question. Then here was the second and then the third question, please.
Thank you. Hi, my
And
name's
please introduce yourself shortly.
Perfect. My name's Christine Campo. I'm from the Ecumenical Advocacy Alliance. My name's Christine Campo. I'm from the Ecumenical Advocacy Alliance, a group of 80 faith-based organizations and churches. My group today was Sven and Ibrahim sitting next to me, and our question is in 3 points. First of all, how do we actively ensure bottom-up engagement in the international processes? 2, how do we actively ensure this engagement also happens in conferences such as this? And how do we mobilize the resources in order to make that happen? The question for me, for the past I was actually shocked to hear that we're missing this bottom-up engagement, because my 4 years with Caritas Internationalis prior to EA that was my main job, is mobilizing grassroots organization or our members to engage in these international processes, and also having capacity building workshops to help them engage with their national processes throughout the year. However, funding always hampers that, and then you end up only bringing people to COPs or to the major events. And how do we make that consistent throughout the year? That's our question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Who wants to trying to answer this question? Jennifer, Daniel, I think you are not so often in these big conferences, or are you? Could also be a question for you. Daniel? Or you? Go ahead.
No, for this, I think that if you look at what happened for the last 10 years or even 15 years, there have been a very big steps in bringing people from at grassroots level to contribute to these debates. Organizations like ROPA, Come Back Again, is a process that started with small groups in villages that brought together the voices to unions, and then they came to national level with national platforms. And now we have a channel where we can draw information. But sometimes, because of power relations within organizations themselves, there may be a critical break between those leaders participating to different meetings and those members who elect them in organizations. But there is a way, there is a potential, and we need to ensure that all this potential is exploited in terms of communication tools. We are experimenting a lot of tools at different level. This kind of discussion that we have at international level, I'm just taking what we had on planet diversity, for instance, here in the same country, in the same building. We put all the informations, technical one, policy, political one, and all these kind, on some audio cassettes. And in countries like Mali, where we have more than 500 community radios in the country, so we contracted with community radios and on policy discussions to put this information at disposal of population, so people can react to that. And these kind of information and indications and the answers that people have are put together and bring also at the national platform level and so on and so forth. So there are experiences like that that need to be also taken into account. But it's a matter of power, because information sharing is a very critical thing, but there is a commitment at different level that we need to do. And taking this into account, we have to know that participation is as a cost. And you are not talking only about participation, but how to responsibilize people in different issues. Because today in West Africa, most of the farmers at grassroots level are involved in some of the political debate, because there is an opportunity for them to know that if my farm doesn't work, this means that there is something wrong in somewhere in a policy or a political. So there is a lot to do, but there is a way, and there are also potential today to move from what we are facing 10 years back to what we are challenging today in terms of communication.
Christoph, can I say one quick thing?
Yes, of course.
I think it has gotten better, but I think continuing to find the funding to bring people, and it sounds like exactly what you were doing was right, is the national level, because so many of these positions are determined nationally. The additional thing I think we have to do is just get more sophisticated in how we work the media and the politics of these meetings back and forth between national level and international, and have local communities, for example, be weighing in newspapers in developed countries or in other developing countries. I don't think we're playing the international, national politics very well. I think people, in my view, get very engaged in the details of the policy debates going on at the negotiations, and what we really need is the politics. We need the movement more than we need the detailed policy engagement. That's my view.
Yes, thank you very much. I think if we let it stay there, that we'll still get some more questions from the floor. Yes, here's the next one, please. The micro is coming. Oh, you have a micro there. Okay.
Yes, my name is Pablo Solon. I'm from Bolivia, but now I'm based in Bangkok, Asia. I'm the executive director of Focus on the Global South. Well, we had a meeting during the last UNFCCC negotiations in Bangkok with social movements of Via Campesina, trade unions.
Sorry, can you go a bit closer to the micro, please?
Yeah, as much as I can.
Sorry.
Okay. And in this meeting with social movements and climate activists, the question was, how do we link social struggles that are happening now with environmental and climate demands? Because we see this is the key thing if we want to change things in the short period of time that we have in the coming 3-5 years the most. There was an agreement that the triangle between climate, food, and financial speculation were key. But the question is, how do we link with those concrete social struggles that are taking place against austerity plans for employment and so on?
Thank you. I think this was more a statement than a question, but it's how to do it. It's the question. Okay. Daniel.
I'll take the microphone, even though I won't pretend that I have a conclusive answer. But I think it is something where we are, as an organization, currently exercising a lot of South-North and learning and South-South exchange, because working with communities, for example, to deliver their land rights first was an obvious thing for Greenpeace Brazil and the Amazon team to do. They never thought of doing anything else. The first thing we did was provide a mapping assistance to indigenous communities to help them actually declare the land rights that are justly theirs. And that was a direct link between their desire to have the land rights back and our desire to protect the forest. We partly were sensitive to that need to create that local link because we had not effectively done so in Canada in previous campaigns, and we're certainly now, if you look at struggles like the Enbridge pipeline developments in Canada, much better, I believe, at being self-reflective and making sure that we link up these struggles between Indigenous peoples and also environmental concerns and rights. Same story, the one that I alluded to earlier in terms of India. It's we've been campaigning against coal in India for a while, but it was an obvious step to take to realize that unless we make that struggle matter to the people who are being cleared off their land and whose forest is being destroyed in order to facilitate the coal mining, we can have all the energy scenarios in the world, we can have all the solutions on paper and in the elite political discussions. We're not going to be effective. So I think the link is happening. We're, also if you have heard of the name Paulo Adario, the leader of our Amazon campaign and UN Forest hero, he's currently spending most of his time in places like Indonesia and places like Cameroon and the Congo, trying to transfer the learnings of how they have worked with Amazon communities to the struggles that we're involved with there. But I'm just sharing these stories. I'm not pretending that that's the answer, but I am very much agreeing that is the link we need to make, and in some cases we're starting to be able to make it. And again, I think the rights approach is one of the key sort of intellectual things that keeps that kind of alliance together.
Can I add something very quickly? I think your question is also connected with the previous one. What we have done in the last so many years, we have put ourselves in different sectors and sectoral silos, and we haven't interacted with others. Climate community is not even interacting with the disaster risk reduction community. There is so much in common. We have not really sufficiently interacted with the food community that has just begun now. And this has happened more at the international level because internationally these are all different institutions. And that's how when you look at the international community, they just don't interact much. We are spending more time looking at text and commas and semicolon than talking about human being, because at the human being level, everything is connected. You're talking about one life. The same person needs food, clean air, water, sanitation, and everything. So we are not, and onus is on us. And if I link it with the previous question, how do we do that? I think we have to go back to the grassroots and listen to people. We are not listening to people enough. We are not having conversation. We policy wonkos, we are just extracting information, which is good for us, creating policy papers, going to international meetings, and making some noise, and creating more and more Copenhagens. right? It's not going to work unless you have conversation with people, unless you talk in their own language, unless you connect with the issues that they are affected directly with. We can't make it a movement. You know, this example of coal, you know, how coal mining is affecting poor people, how tribals and indigenous people are getting displaced, how it is connected with their life. All those connections need to be understood and analyzed at the grassroots level, and then build a movement. You know, this working on text and commas and semicolons won't take us anywhere.
Yes, thank you. Looking to the board side, we have room for two more questions. One on the right-hand side. You were very early putting up your hand.
Microphone.
One on the right-hand side, which is here, and one on the left-hand side.
Two on the left.
Let's start here on the right-hand side, and then we go there. Please.
Thank you. This question is on behalf of Tilman, Kartike, Orion, and myself, and I'm Suman Sahai from Gene Campaign, India. Our question is really addressed at food and nutrition, which is basic. And we would like to ask what kind of structures, policies, efforts would be required to curtail extravagance, which is often perceived as an individual right. And here we're seeing a sort of a conflict between right and responsibility. But curtail extravagance and replace it with equity, sustainability, and sufficiency in access to food and nutrition particularly. But these are in terms of wastage of food or pollution, the right to pollute because you have the right to drive a big car or be energy intensive in your usage. So how do we move away from this rights approach in a certain sense to curtail extravagance and move to sufficiency, equity, and sustainability, which are also rights? I'd like to hear views on that. We would like to hear views on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this question moves us exactly in the two sides of our question. There can't be any solution without the right to food, right to water, and access to payable energy for the poor. On the other hand, we have to accept the limits of the planetary boundaries, and it's not in the interest of us to jump through those. So who wants to take this question?
You start?
Well, I mean, just to be very clear, when I talk about a rights approach, I do not mean the right to pollute. That right, as far as I can see, has a lot of basis in shopping malls and the reality of consumer advertising, but doesn't have a reality in international law or in any philosophical system I will recognize as just. So we are talking about the right to access, the right to the basic needs of all to be fulfilled. And if we take that right approach serious, there is no question that we will have to define upper limits of consumptions and will have to accept massive reductions of resource use. And that will apply, I'm afraid, to all of the 4.9 billion projected middle class people around the world. I think that's one thing that we have not stressed enough in terms of the discourse of the climate movement, but it is something that the whole movement can learn from the climate movement. And the climate movement was first to understand that we have to set the upper limits, and that unless we set the upper limits and talk about how to share, how to get there in terms of meeting those targets, we will not get anywhere. So that approach to agree the upper limits and agree on systems of opportunity and burden sharing, I think is right and is one that we can approach together. I think where we need to put our collective effort, and this comes back to a previous question, is to not just talk about this in the abstract, but identify very clearly where the power blockages are that stop us from doing that, and that allow us to still get confused between the right to pollute and the right to access. And there are many of those, but one of them that we, I think, as a campaigning organization that is very visual, that is very much about presence in the media and being able to push messages through the mainstream media. One of the challenges we face there is indeed the corporate structure of our global media. And very often, when we have more transformative messages, we don't get heard. But when we have very simple messages, don't do this, don't do that, give us this, we do get heard. So that's one of the many elements of why it is so difficult to move from a less joined-up approach to a more joined-up approach for a campaigning organization. But to be very clear, the rights we're talking about are the rights to something, but not to pollute.
First, I think.
No, very
Thank
quickly,
you.
because this is a very, very important question. And it has to be the fight for social movement on this issue, because when you stop at the issue of right to food, it may create and make many controversial things that we are fighting against and we are fighting for. The first one is it seems that sometimes that we are coming back to this concept of food security. Eat and shut up. Once you have food, you don't have any word to say. How it's produced, how it's consumed, etc., etc. So this issue of access to food is a very critical point that we need to tackle. You're right in saying this. If you don't relate it to the nutrition issues, that is also related to the cultural issues background that we have, because food is also culture. If you forget that, we'll just stop on this issue of right. Right means access to it because you deserve to eat any kind of food that you want. And I don't want to eat any kind of maize. I don't want to eat any kind of millet. There are specific things that I want to eat that are related to my culture, to my belief. I don't eat some kind of meat because they don't deserve my culture. So this issue of right to food, we have to go behind it in terms of explaining what it is about. There is pollution issue, but also there is this ability that we have to invest in where we find that this will be more helpful sustainably, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is why food sovereignty is critical in that sense, because it's bringing the issue of right, but also the issue of just bringing on the table what we think can help us to, in a sustainable way, to feed the population and to have access to also to our cultural background. So we need to be more critical on that, because we have 6 principles on food sovereignty, and because this principle is tackling this kind of belief that right to food is accessing to food, and then you eat and you shut up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yes, do you want to add, or?
I'll just say one line. When we talk about rights and responsibilities, we also need to talk about whose rights are we talking about. And the same thing I would like to say when we're talking about transformation, I think we all have to have a consensus transformation from whose perspective. And that is very important. Whose rights are we talking about? I'll just say that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now we have the... Jennifer, no, sorry, I didn't see you in the back.
It's okay. My only quick word is that I think, the question was how to actually move these issues forward. And my sense is that you have to provide people the alternatives at cost. And also the vision for how you can get there. Sitting in the most extravagant country on earth right now, if you can't show people how they can get to work in a different way, they're not going to do it. So I think the climate movement has not been as good as linking the impacts and what's at stake with how basic services can continue to be provided.
Thank you. Now we have the next question here, and you have identified one group. Okay.
Yeah,
Does this work? Karin Ulmer from APRODEF, it's the Protestant Development Agencies working on EU policies. It's in comment to the question how to link, and I'd like to specify how to link the agriculture and food security movements, and I think there are many, and many of them are very grassroots based and perhaps not as visual as the climate, And it's an appreciation of the conference bringing these two issues, energy and climate and food security and agriculture, together. But I think there is more need to define these relations and a bit of caution of not using food as a driver or an element, but having food in its own right, because there's, I think, lots of issues in terms of the relationship between food and climate that even within our own organizations we're struggling. And we have seen climate change taking over the international campaigns. But I think the food is there, though not as vocal perhaps as some of the climate change. So, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a statement, and to say from the organizer's point of view, to organize this conference and to put those two issues, agriculture and food and climate change and energy in the focus of it, this was one intention, really, to bring this right to food sovereignty debate more in the center of this debate, because we have the impression that there is one that is a target in itself, so it's not just a driver for a better outcome in the climate debate, but it's in a target for itself, and we have to fight for this. And in addition, it's one of the strongest drivers for the climate debate. And on the other hand, the climate debate, or the climate change, not the climate debate, climate change can become one of the strongest threats for food sovereignty. And at the same time, also potential solutions for climate change can become a major threat for it. And so we want to focus the debate also on those tensions and synergies between those two options. Thank you for this point. I'm sorry, we are now very close, and as we have the right to food as a basic principle of our conference, we must come quite soon to an end of our first roundtable here. It's in 5 minutes that you are supposed then to go to lunch. And just to say an additional small answer also on this question regarding how difficult it is in our societies to raise awareness about the necessary change was also the discussion here in this conference hall, that we get vegetarian food also for served here later on, so this was a long discussion and very difficult to raise the understanding for it. In this, there are so many small struggles and fights we have to move in. Okay, now I have the very difficult task shortly to summarize a very rich debate. And my starting point for this is a point which was brought different times, is how to connect the life struggle of different groups in different societies around the world to the necessary political movements, both for the right to food sovereignty and for climate change. How to connect this in a way that it becomes more powerful. And we have seen then different parts of this debate to say, okay, empowerment is important, and the food sovereignty debate is part of this empowerment debate. We have seen the solidarity aspect is crucial, and this is part of the networking exercise, both in different regions and between us, and our conference is also part of this networking exercise and solidarity exercise, but it's also hopefully part, or will result, to campaigning elements, where to focus, what are the key issues, and how to bring those people who are the really affected people in these campaigns, not just as objects used by campaigners in a way to say, okay, that is a nice story we can use, but as subjects really as playing a strong role in this. And we know all this, how difficult this is. There are so many hurdles financial hurdles, resource hurdles, language hurdles, organizational hurdles. We have heard from Greenpeace, we have heard from Caritas, which were two of the quite a number of organizations trying to do this in the last couple of years now. And we have seen positive examples, let's say stones in this river put from those organizations, but we also see those stones are not yet enough to carry us over the river. And so we definitely have to work here. We have seen that the rights debate is crucial on the one hand side, that it can be very focused. The right to food and right to water has also a lot of, it's a procedural right, where countries are obliged to involve the most vulnerable, to give them a voice. So it's part of the empowerment structure, and it has to be linked then with the sovereignty issue. If they are really involved, then it is not just this formal right that they can get something to eat, whatever it is. And so this is one thing for the campaigning. Another thing is to address the big hurdles and the big power hurdles in this game. So we have mentioned the World Bank, and we had the companies in this world who have banks and other investors who have invested already 5 times as much in reserves of fossil energy than we are allowed to burn if we want to stay only below 2 degrees. And more would be necessary than only to stay below 2 degrees. So it's this power struggle, how to organize this in a way, that's absolutely crucial as well. And we never should make one of the 2 crucial targets of the food sovereignty, right to food movement, and of the climate movement use them only as an instrument to get the other target through. But they are really absolutely necessary and fundamental targets in its own. And so we have to make sure that we get this kind of connection. And I think if we get this is also a big part of the trust building between the different communities to move us forward. So I want to let it stay there. So this is my short, crisp summary. Of course, there are many other facets of this what was discussed. I want to thank all of you on the panel, and Jennifer, especially you in Washington, to such a very early time after the hurricane that you are with us.